Shalom and welcome to the 10th Jerusalem Writers Festival in Mishkenot Sha'ananim. This event is organized in collaboration with the literary supplement of Yediot Achronot and with Am Oved Publishing House. Now, shall I open with compliments to the great work of your translator, Hebrew translator? Don't be intimidated. Being granted with good translator is really appreciated by us authors. So you had gained one that had made a terrific job. Her name is Atalia Zilber, and she had adopted your fantastic lush English, the prose, into a lucid, musical, and very enjoyable Hebrew. So I can reassure you, especially since you're such an avid admirer of birds singing, that your poetic English was beautifully sung via Atalia's Hebrew.
Great. I wish I could read it and see for myself.
You're not aware of how much your Israeli readership is enthusiastic. You haven't yet visited in Israel.
No, I have not been to Israel. It's a regret. I do hope eventually to fix that. But no, I'm aware that people read my books there, and I'm very grateful for it. And that at least has come through to me, even though I haven't been there.
And I have a friend who is an ornithologist who had urged me to tell you that if not for the human landscape, then you should know that Israel is a bird's flyway, a major flyway from Europe to Africa and back. And she referred it to be the Motel 6 of birds. So you should know that.
I have friends who have birded in Israel, and they tell me that in the spring and fall, the raptors in particular migrating through, it's quite a spectacle. So yes, that's a good way to get me to go to a place, is talk about the bird. I admit. I like people too. I couldn't be a novelist. I couldn't be a novelist if I didn't like people, but getting on a plane, it's nice to have two reasons to go, not one.
So you too don't enjoy the travel of promoting a book as much?
I like it. I did my tour for Crossroads entirely at home from this kitchen that you see me in, and I missed the live interaction with readers. I missed getting to shake readers' hands and sign books. It's fun to be on tour. But I am going to Europe for some events in September, and when I started looking at the schedule, I realized this is not going to be as much fun as it used to be because I'm not as young as I used to be. Like in the case of Europe this September, I am building in free days for myself, days when I have nothing scheduled, because I just don't have the same crazy desire to do constant interviews and constant public events that I did 20 years ago when it was all new. It was like, hey, people actually are listening to what I have to say. It was exciting then, and I'm a little older now.
And you like your routine of writing. It's fine to say that producing the work, or perhaps loving the labor more than the career, makes you a better author, or perhaps a more.
I do. At a certain point, you ask yourself, well, what else would I want in a career way? Well, I haven't won this prize or that prize, but I'm probably never going to win those prizes. If you sit around waiting to win some prize or I don't know what else you might even get. Some medal. Uh, that means that every time that prize is awarded to someone else, you just feel bad. And it's not enough to get me out of bed in the morning and go to the office, trying to hit some new benchmark. And I have through long practice learned to write because I enjoy writing, and I enjoy being in that rhythm of 7 days a week going to the office. Lately, I've been putting in 4 hours, not six, at the office because I'm really struggling to figure something out. But to do it every day, it's just right, and that is the reward at this point. No external reward can compare to it.
You managed to get on the departure of writing in 4 hours and have the session be really useful in 4 hours? Don't you need the old way of six?
Um, Six is nice if you can get it, but and no, I don't get as much done in 4 hours as I do in six, but I get enough done. I can write a page in 4 hours, and um, I used to do 5 pages a day, 8 pages a day, but I'm happy with one. If and I've changed the way I write. I'm no longer racing ahead and worrying about fixing things later. I really move forward one sentence at a time. That is the result of my having reached an age where I have to invent everything. I'm not drawing on any real life stories. I'm really not drawing on real life characters. Um, and I just don't know what the next sentence is going to be. I discover the character, I discover the story going sentence by sentence. And that's slow work. And after 4 hours of it, I'm ready to do something else.
I'm envious about the element of surprise and not so much the performance of control that it is with the combination of invention and memory.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously still am in control, but the way I see it, I'm creating an interface on the page, a place where uh, what I'm imagining, what I'm putting out, can be taken in by a reader and reimagined in the reader's head. And that interface has very strict rules. So I'm in control, but I'm also obeying the rules of the way story has to work. And and there's a real puzzle-like aspect to figuring out, well, what's going to work within the context of that interface. What am I allowed to do? And I really don't know. So there is a. It's not like I'm simply executing the plan. It's really become the opposite of that. I'm uncovering the way it has to be in order to work as an interface.
So it's a question that I was thinking of asking you later, but on that matter of the more practical tool, do you prefer the hovering overview of the bird, or do you like the working within the grass, like more like the ant?
I think between the two, more like the ant. Uh, Although there are certain kinds of birds in Europe, your buntings, your larks, that spend a lot of time low to the ground, and perhaps not coincidentally, those are my favorite kinds of birds. I like the low to the ground brown birds, and um, the kind of work I'm doing now, it really you can't be any more in the weeds than working again and again on a sentence to get it right before moving on to the next sentence. I do obviously have some notion of where I want to try to get. So there is a bird-like aspect to it too, but the daily experience is much closer to the ground. It's the skulking bird kind of work, picking
It's
through the
lovely.
leaves.
I identify and I prefer this position as well. Now that you say while reading Crossroads, I was and while preparing myself to this conversation, I read somewhere that you were saying that you sometimes wonder if an author has more than 6 novels within him. And I was reminded with this Mark Twain saying that that he contains a multitude.
I think it was Whitman who said, "I contain
Whitman.
multitude." Yeah.
Oh, I'm so ashamed.
No, no.
Um,
Made mistake I could have made myself.
so 5 works of fiction. And have you ever counted the number of characters that you created?
No.
So you
well, it wouldn't take long because I really only count point of view characters, main characters, and there are only a handful in any given book, and there are only a handful of books, so it wouldn't be a hard number to come up with.
Yet you are now on the quest of completing a new trilogy. Crossroads is the first among 3 that are about to come. And have you started the second one? Because it has been since October 2021 that you published Crossroad. I just want to make sure.
I am working on a book that could be considered a sequel to Crossroads, yes.
And can I say a hunch of mine that Judson, the 9-year-old character that his voice is not heard in Crossroads, is going to be a major part of the sequel?
Judson is definitely more present in the second book than in the first.
Oh, I'm so happy. Let me just I shouldn't.
I'm happy that you're happy. Trying to develop a character, even if you do know a little bit about him or her, it's the hardest work, and it takes me years. Any notion that the next book would be easier because I'd already written Crossroads has been dispelled by the difficulty of figuring out who, among others, Judson is as an adult. That there are no shortcuts to the creation of a 3-dimensional main character.
You're not using the leftovers of Crossroads to create the next one?
Not the way I work anymore. There are no leftovers. It's written one sentence at a time. And written one sentence at a time from page 1. So I don't write ahead at all. And the only leftovers there could be would be little snippets that were removed when I was cleaning things up at the end. But no, there's sadly no leftovers. I used to have leftovers. I mean, all my other books have come out of little bits of leftovers I had. But Crossroads, the drawer was empty. There were no leftovers to start with.
I once was at a reading of yours, and you said that in every book you become a new person. So this still valid when it comes to this point in your career?
I think that still holds. You become a different person simply through the passage of time. I think I'm conscious now of being in my 60s in a way I was not particularly conscious of being in my late 50s when I started work on Crossroads. And it feels different to be in one's 60s. And there are a whole lot of things that come with that awareness of one's age. Um, but I would stress that the writing of the book, if taken seriously, is part of the process of becoming a different person. You are, if you're like me and you have a horror of repeating yourself, you are trying to do something new, and the act of trying to do something new is what opens up certain kinds of awarenesses, may even change the way you behave with other people. It may change you in your political behavior. All these things do get uncovered in the terrible struggle to write something that isn't like anything you've written before.
Terrible struggle. Thank you for the reminder. So let me just sum up with a headline that the plot takes place in Chicago's suburbia and tells the story of a crumbling family. In the background, there's a Vietnam War, and perhaps the novel points out the two fundamental powers of Christianity and the heritage of the 60s to be the forces that are active in nowadays America, in this culture that perhaps threatened by purism and guilt. And did I mention or not, it sets in the early 70s. In one afternoon of December 23rd, 1971, right?
Correct.
Can you please recall where were you on that date?
No, I was in, well, I know approximately. I would have been in Webster Groves, Missouri, so a 5-hour drive south of the Chicago suburbs. Um, and I would have been at home with my family. My mother's mother was still alive. She would have been there with her sister, my great Aunt Betty, and we would have been doing the traditional holiday food. What I'm wondering is whether that's the December in which, right after Christmas, I was put on a plane for the first time in my life and sent to my cousins in Minnesota. That would have been that year or maybe the next year. But no, I was in St. Louis.
So your extended family was living not far away from you guys?
My parents were Minnesotan, and we were the Southern family, having moved to St. Louis, which is why I was sent to Minnesota. I loved the snow, and we didn't get enough snow in St. Louis, and it wasn't cold enough for me. So knowing that, I was sent to my cousins in Minneapolis to spend a week building snow forts and going sledding. It was a big deal. It was very exciting being on a plane for the first time. They didn't have
Yeah.
assigned seats. I sat down in first class because my father had said, you get a better ride at the front of the plane. And I thought, well, here's a seat right at the front of the plane.
Was it Western, the airline, the air company?
It was a now defunct airline called Braniff, which served the upper Midwest. Um,
Okay,
yeah.
I think I flew once with this. What is still Midwestern about you after all these years that you lived in New York and California? What's still pounding of that Midwest character?
I no longer believe there is such a thing as a Midwestern character. Um, I the problem is if you try to define it, one can say, well, that sounds a lot like people in Australia, or that sounds like people in Wales. Um, it doesn't, I'm not sure it has any meaning, uh, or it has a meaning so specific and personal that it can't be generalized to a Midwestern character. Um, I think it's much easier for me to talk about the ways in which I was shaped by the 1970s,
Mm.
because I do think there was a particular spirit happening in the country, certainly in my town, in the first half of the 1970s that did shape me and that I continue to feel in myself. And some of that spirit is in Crossroads. I was part of a Christian youth fellowship myself, with an emphasis on honesty, authenticity, personal growth, and what we were talking about earlier, my turn away from certain career benchmarks toward finally writing because I enjoy writing, preferring the process to the rewards for the product. That's a very, very 1970s kind of
Mm.
attitude. That got swept away in the careerist 1980s. And it's never really been reclaimed, except it never really went away in Northern California, which is one reason I think I felt immediately home when I first came to Santa Cruz, where I'm now sitting. Um, and there are that kind of groovy uh,
Naivety.
preference. Yeah, it's well, a certain kind of innocence, but also a an emphasis on process, and not into the same kind of careerism that New York was marked by. I spent 25 years in New York, and those were the years when I was working on my career. And um, and yet, most of the best writing I've done, beginning in 1998, has been done in California. Um, and I do think that doesn't go back to the Midwest. I think it goes back to the 1970s.
Thank you. Referring to the 70s, both I want to ask about the music you heard while writing Crossroads. Was it a 70s music?
Um, a little bit, but I would occasionally go back and listen to a song that I remembered from the 70s. But those songs were so burned into my head. Crosby, Stills, and Nash singing "Wooden Ships," even though it's not mentioned in the book. Neil Young's song uh, "Tell Me Why," all of the whole record after the Gold Rush, um, Carole King,
Mm.
Joni Mitchell, all of those things, they were in my head, and in my head so deeply I almost didn't have to actually listen to them.
Okay. Um, on the original cover, the English cover, there's a picture of your friends, isn't it?
Ah, yes, yes. We had a lot of trouble coming up with a cover image. There's quite a bit of material about Arizona in the book, and we tried to find a good Arizona landscape, and they all ended up looking like Western novels, cowboy novels. So I said, no, we want the youth scene from the 70s. And it turns out if you Google, young people early 1970s, you get the most cliched coffee table book set of images. And it's like, no, 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 no. We've seen all those pictures. And that wasn't really what it was like. Um, and when you take one of those familiar images, it looks ironic. And this is not an ironic book particularly. I haven't lost my irony, but it's not. I'm not making fun of the early 70s.
No,
I'm not
you're very much.
quoting. I'm not quoting the 1970s. I have no interest in, the zeitgeist of the 1970s, all of that. So I looked on my computer and I had these images from my own youth group experiences, and I sent a couple of them to the book designer and my editor. And my editor looked at one of them and said, "Oh, there's your cover." And I said, oh, well, that's a little weird. I mean, that's my friend Bill and my friend Karen, but
What did Bill and Karen say about your choice?
you know, they laughed. I sent them the picture, and they said sure. And then I said, you know who took the picture? And they said no. So I did 2 months of diligence trying to find out who had taken that picture, because that group, that youth group from back then, they're all still in touch, or many of them are in touch on Facebook. The picture went up. Everyone asked everyone, who took this picture? Did you take this picture? No one knows who took the picture. So not only is it two friends, but we couldn't even do a photograph credit. We had to just like leave off the photo credit because we don't know who took the picture.
Perhaps yourself. You had
No,
it
I,
in your.
no, I wasn't there. I had scanned the photograph when I was doing a nonfiction piece about that youth group many years ago, but I had not. Of course, what do you got a lot of junk on your computer. Who takes the time to label everything carefully? So I didn't label who took the picture.
Okay. Um, Let me again introduce the book to whom who hasn't read it, and I honestly deeply recommend to do. The novel depicts six characters: the parents Russ and Marion, who are in their 40s, late 40s, and their four kids. Each faces a moral dilemma between right and wrong, between selfishness and the virtuous choice to be made. So religion is a major theme here. And while reading it, I suddenly noticed that even the title has a cross in it. Something that I never heard, since I'm not an English native speaker. I never heard the word cross within the crossroads.
Well, the title refers to the name of a Christian youth group, and of course that name would have been chosen um, to try to bridge traditional Christianity, the emphasis on the cross, with the contemporary youth culture, um, as represented by the Cream song Crossroads, from the Robert Johnson song Crossroad Blues.
Were you considering different titles?
No, that one came to me pretty early on. Um, no, not anything that was good enough to. I I always have titles rattling around in my head, many of them bad. I've always wanted to write a book called Pungent Sound,
What?
which is a typo for Puget Sound, which is the body of water that Seattle is located on. And I don't know, I just like I will never probably put the title Pungent Sound on anything, but I liked it. The notion it's an olfactory adjective, pungent, applied to a auditory sound. Um, I yeah, I accumulate titles, but most of them are too silly to use.
Surely it's part of the perhaps the evolution of the story. The more you know of it, the more you are uh, sure of its core, of its major idea.
Crossroads turned out to have some metaphorical applicability as well, beyond the Christian metaphor. The book was a real departure for me formally, in that two-thirds of the action, maybe three-quarters of the book, takes place on this single afternoon and evening. And that required rather intricate choreographing of the paths of the five point of view characters, because they needed to keep intersecting,
Mm-hmm.
in order that there would be good scenes between them, and and those scenes had to happen in the right sequence. And so, if you were to map it out, there would be a lot of crossroads between the trajectories of those characters.
Yeah. I had a friend who asked me, "Oh, you're reading the new Franzen book. What is it about?" And it took me like a moment to contemplate, and I said that I think it's about how inevitable the sin is for a human being, how it's impossible to avoid a sin or the sin.
That's, uh, I wouldn't strongly argue with you on that.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't strongly argue. No.
Okay. Okay. Can you also agree that perhaps the seventh character is God?
Or maybe sixth, because Judson, who's the young child in the family, doesn't get a point of view. Of course, God doesn't get a point of view unless you consider God having the point of view of looking at all of these characters.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to suggest that your pen pal in this novel, the author you correspond with, is one named Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Yeah, he never writes back. Or maybe I should say it's been about 140 years since he wrote back. I don't know what I said, but he kind of went silent on me.
How Soviet of you. You should perhaps relate. I mean, contemplating with subject as atonement and redemption brings Raskolnikov to mind, but the more I read Crossroad, I thought perhaps the brothers, the siblinghood as a subject is bring to mind more of the Karamazov brothers.
Well, I mean, I should say Opa Shaw. That's a big name to be compared with for a latter day writer.
Don't
I
worry.
do have the highest respect for Dostoevsky. It was pretty great 1-2 punch with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and there was a 3 and 4 punch when you throw in Turgenev and Chekhov. It was an amazing period in world literature. Yes, I think the what's interesting is when you say that is I don't think there's all that much interaction between the siblings in Crossroads. It is more their parents' book than it is their book. Yes, 3 of the kids we spend a lot of time with, but really only one of them has a serious relationship, and that would be Becky and Clem's relationship. The oldest 2 children are very close until suddenly they're not at all close. Um, I went back and tried to reread Brothers Karamazov after I finished Crossroads and found it not nearly as good as I remembered. And it took me about 100 pages to realize that that was because I was reading the new Pavir Volkonsky translation, and it's terrible. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, no, it's kind of an internet. It's a scandal why those translations are considered superior to the many great ones before them. They're not superior; they're inferior. But I wanted to go back and see to how much time Dostoevsky spent not with the vertical relationship between father and sons, but in
Mhm.
the lateral, the horizontal relationships among the siblings. And that's very interesting. And there is a kind of juice to those. It's fun because you actually don't see it that often in literature. The intensity of relationship between siblings that you see in that book. So that's exciting to me, and I'm hoping to get more into it as I get deeper into this larger story.
I love it. And that brings me to the thinking of your favorite myth among the Jewish mythology, which is Joseph and his brothers.
Well, that is the one that gets mentioned. That's the leading Pentateuch reference in Crossroads, and I think so. So Russ, who is the father of the family, um, not the strongest guy, and he spends the entire book pursuing a completely illicit relationship with a woman in his parish, who's in his flock. It's a huge no-no, but it stretches over much of the book. His pursuit of this younger widow, and so he's miserable and feels in many ways estranged from God, and he has his for 3 years he's been sick with hatred and envy of the youth minister in his church, a much younger man, and at a certain point he tells the story of Joseph and his brothers as he sees it, and I went back and reread the story, and Russ's feeling was like mine when I reread it. It's Joseph is the chosen one. The Lord was with Joseph. It's said again and again and again. What happens? The brothers are envious because Joseph just has it. He's got a glow about him. People just want to follow him. Everything he does turns to gold, and the brothers hate him. So we all know what happens. But here's the funny thing. I remember as a kid reading that story and thinking, and there was the whole musical, Joseph in his many-colored coat, and it was, we love Joseph. Hooray for Joseph, wonderful guy, amazing. And wow, he almost died, but instead, no, he became the Pharaoh's right-hand man and came back
He's the
and
prince.
yeah, he was the prince. He was the guy. Wasn't he great? I was like, why do I feel so much sympathy for the brothers? Which is probably it's a pretty New Testament take on that story. But
The newest among the New Testaments.
but it reminded me of a Charles Schultz, a Peanuts cartoon, where Linus is going on about this incredible football game with this amazing comeback in the final seconds, and the fans swarming the field deliriously, and it was just the most amazing, wonderful thing he'd ever seen. And Charlie Brown, there's a pause, and Charlie Brown says, "How did the other team feel?" Um, and that,
Charlie Brown and
yeah, right.
Joseph at the same breath. Wonderful. But it's the I can remember. I can never remember the difference between envy and jealousy, but perhaps they are both collided with the envy and jealousy of the brothers of
Sure.
Joseph,
Yeah.
because he was such a brag. I mean,
He knew it, right? And it's like and haven't we all met a Joseph like that? Often the younger or youngest child in a family. And haven't we all at least once or twice been very annoyed by that person?
and you're the youngest. Why are you saying that?
Oh, well, I think the same could be. Well, I don't have envious brothers. They were
Your brothers
much
are
older.
much older than you are.
Yeah, 9 and 12 years older, and so there was the competition thing was not particularly present. We've always gotten along, really, just consistently my entire life. We've gotten along well. Um, Nevertheless, I think they have a certain resentment of how easy I had it. Because they had all this conflict with my parents, and my parents, they made a lot of mistakes. By the time I come along, my parents were older. They'd figured it out. They knew not to make the mistakes they'd made with my brothers, and I had it easy. They should resent me, frankly. Um,
So you were in your teenagers, you were by yourself at the house with your mom and dad.
yeah, starting when I was 10, from then on, and really very much alone with my mother, because my father was a railroad engineer, and he was often gone for weeks at a time.
Huh. That explains so much of your knowledge of female subjectivity. That's a compliment. You can enjoy it. You can indulge it.
Thank you.
Coming from a female writer and a reader, I I I I feel that you know of what you're telling about. You know the female psyche, and the and that siblinghood is more to the domestic one. I believe that we are all are being seen by the eyes of God, or between ourselves, imagining the eyes of God as brothers and sisters. So there is one that is more favored, the one that had been fortunate to be given with more chances, with more opportunities, with more virtues of, by nature. That brings me to capitalism, but I'm not sure it's the right subject that I'd like to use the time with you to discuss. But can you see
well,
what I mean?
yeah, I would say that I'm not a religious person, but religion is important to me and was formative for me. And um, I guess if actually believing in God and believing in metaphysical things is not the requirement for being religious, I am kind of a religious guy. The Old and New Testament myths, they were formative for me, um, and and even though I believe God to be an invention, a projection, uh, I still feel when you say when you use a phrase like a godlike view, God's view, um, with the distance and the compassion and the love and the forgiveness that that implies, that connects into a whole set of associations for me that feel right, and 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 it has become increasingly important to keep in mind the possibility of that perspective. And people who withdraw from the world, um, holy men, holy women in monasteries or in Zen retreats or whatever, a lot of that is, yes, it's very self-involved, but some of it does entail getting the kind of distance that allows you to simply accept things as the way they must be. And there again, there's this sort of religious cast to that I find familiar and appealing.
Thank you for this identification. And not only that, is I see a resemblance between not only the overview of the author hovering his characters, and as we said, the in the grass, but also the inner monologue that a person has that is being interpreted as a dialogue with God. To be, I mean, you do a very fine usage of it in the story by transforming it to a dialogue with a confession and a dialogue with a psychiatrist.
Right, and then one has the same kind of conversation within oneself. That's a very old fixture of of religion, is the kind of conversation one has with oneself. And yes, obviously in the early Bible stories, when Abraham goes on the mountain with Isaac, that is literalized as a conversation with God, but it is a precursor and a representation of the kind of interior conversations we are having precisely in those critical moments when we're trying to figure out what the right thing to do is and how to live.
Could it be that the Lamberts from the corrections are the neighbors of the Hildebrands?
It's difficult for me to separate the Lamberts as characters from the method the writer used to depict them. And I feel as if the spirit of the corrections is very, very different from the spirit of Crossroads, so much so that I don't feel they are neighbors. some things are fixtures of my work. I do like developing characters, and I do find family a very useful organizing narrative principle. Um, but when I think about how Enid Lambert was rendered, I think she was ultimately a there was some sympathy for her by the author from the author, but she was a comic character, and that was really it was sort of relentless. It was almost as if she were being satirized for her old-fashioned Midwestern prejudices and preconceptions, and so she has a very different flavor to me than say Marion Hildebrandt.
And that brings me to your mom. Has she get a chance before you lost her to read Crossroads?
Oh, my mother died in 1999, so no. Um, but I would say I was talking with a friend here the other day who converted to Judaism some years ago, and he's become very, very interested in the old-fashioned Jewish death rituals involving the two cleansings of the body and the guarding of the body, things that had really fallen out of fashion here in the US, except among Orthodox Jews, but are now kind of being revived in the same way that organic vegetables are coming back. We're starting to do things the old way. And he volunteered to be the guy who was in charge of those rituals at his synagogue in upstate New York. And he was talking about how his how the person how a person physically dies but doesn't die, that which is a familiar concept. People have a life in their body, but they also have a life as psychological objects in other people's minds, and particularly in the minds of people who love them. And you're not really dead until there's no one alive who remembers you. That's a familiar idea. But what he said that I thought I was initially surprised by, but then thought, hey, was that not only do people who are physically dead continue to live, but they continue to change.
Wow.
Um, that's and as soon as he said it, I was like, you know what? That's right. Because
Wow.
my
I'm
mother
like
has
almost shiver. I almost
my mother has been changing
shiver.
in my mind for the last 23 years. Since it'll be 23 years in July that she died, she continues to evolve in my mind.
To
And
grow.
well, in a funny way, yes. Think some of that has to do with like getting deeper into the age when I knew my mother well, the age she was. But and some of it is probably I'm honestly forgetting who she really was and inventing who I would have liked her to be, or I would like her to have been. But some of it is, I think, also that I I'm understanding uh, things that were in her that I could not possibly have been aware of at the time, but nonetheless were. And those things are beginning to express themselves more forcefully. So in that sense, she really is changing.
It's unbelievably uh, new, this idea
Well,
that the
my
ones
friend's
we
name is Matthew Harl, and he is a sculptor. And I don't think it was original to him either, but it was that's the first time I'd heard that concept, and I thought immediately, yeah, he's right.
yes, I lost my father 12 years ago this week, and when I was asking you about your mom and understanding that it was not as recent as I thought, because while I'm reading Crossroad, I was thinking of her, what she would have said about the book. And the essay you wrote about your father's illness was so intense and so memorable that now I'm saying, is it as some sort of orphanhood above the siblinghood that perhaps this book is a gift to your parents, to the 70s, as a something to cherish your childhood, your upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, if counter to all of the evidence and all of common sense, my parents are still alive as individuals in some faraway galaxy, having been whisked away here in some immaterial form after their death. If they were there and I were to send them anything that I'd written, I'd probably send them Crossroads.
That's a fantastic answer. And if it was via a certain bird, which of the birds would have been the postman, the deliverer?
Oh man. Well, I have so many favorite birds. It undermines the very notion of favoriteness. Um, but
The
I
one
have
appropriate for this job.
I have written about the fact that, or my suspicion that if extraterrestrials landed in a spacecraft on the planet and saw a person walking by and then saw a king penguin walking by, they might look at the human being and say, ooh, disgusting. They've got runny noses and
Okay.
weird flesh, and what's with the kind of gangly limbs? And they would look at the penguin and say, now that is a beautiful animal. Whatever galaxy you're in, that is a beautiful animal. So for that reason, if travel to a distant galaxy were involved, I think a penguin would be a good ambassador.
Do you have another soft spot for a different animal than bird?
I kind of bird oriented. I was bitten by a dog when I was a kid, and I spent many decades being afraid of dogs. Now I've
I'm
gotten
sorry.
over that, and I like dogs quite a bit. I even occasionally meet cats I like if they're indoors, not out there killing birds. But no, I'm really I really fell hard for birds.
Yes, you convinced us. I don't know how much time we have left. Can you just
I think we're
hint,
kind of we're about 5 minutes short of the hour point, so we should probably wrap it up.
wrap it up? So I'll give you um, I'd like a finale that would be
Maybe we've already had the finale. Maybe the king penguin swimming to
I,
another planet's a good finale.
okay, let's say that. Uh, let's say something about the generation of your new readers. Okay, could it be that very much like the daughters and sons of the hippies, they are more conservative than their parents nowadays? Let's say millennials or Z generation.
Um, I don't see a lot of evidence of that, and the polling does not suggest that. Yes, there are plenty of young Trumpists, but I think by and large, uh, the in the U.S. At least, the younger you go, the younger the tranche of voters, the more likely they are to vote Democrat.
Mm.
Um, and 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 college, university, especially in the last 10 years in the U.S., has really lurched to the far left. And so I think that backlash against the hippie parents, we're now into the next generation, so there's a backlash against the backlash.
Okay. Given a choice to have lunch with Faulkner, Nabokov, or Tolstoy, would you pick?
Assuming that the language barrier is not an issue.
Mm. I didn't consider this to be an issue. Thank you for noting.
But I was just thinking this morning about Nabokov and what an incredibly good writer he was. And what a miracle it was that he got to be a better writer in English than only about 10 other people who've ever written in America, even though it was
Unbelievable.
not unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Uh, what, what he did as a writer of English. Um, I mean, Conrad also, it was his second language, but Conrad, frankly, sort of reads like it's his second language. Okay.
So brilliant and so mastering both storytelling and the language, the beauty of the language.
Right. The storytelling, I mean, he had that already. He started with that, but the level of not punning, but really genuine fun play with words. I think what put it in mind was there's a there's somebody passes Charles Kinbote a note in Pale Fire saying, "Man," it's a student, I think, saying, "Man, you got to do something about your H dash 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 S," and Kinbote's response is, as many of you will remember, is, God, young people are so illiterate these days. He doesn't realize that the word hallucination doesn't doesn't have so few letters, um, and of course, the word that the student meant was you have really bad halitosis, bad breath, and which so it's a great joke at Kinbote's expense, but of course it's also so perfect because because of course that's how Kinbote misreads it, because he really does have hallucinations, but obviously also bad breath. Nevertheless, I mean, I never know how to answer the question, who would you like to be at a dinner table with? Because I find socializing so stressful in situations like that. So honestly, I would evade your question, while acknowledging that it would be difficult to say which among those three writers is the best or something.
Okay, no, it's not the best. It's the one that the character would be fun to hang out with.
I have a feeling. Well, I certainly wouldn't have wanted to hang out with Tolstoy in his later Christian phase. He sounds like kind of a pain in the ass with his crazy politics and his crazy spirituality.
And what would you eat?
Well, I was just I was ruling out Tolstoy. I, Nabokov, I feel like he would have just been all about Nabokov. So by default, Faulkner would probably be the choice, and we would eat, I don't know, barbecue, I hope. But
Yes,
really, what I was going to say is that the person I want to meet and have dinner with is Shakespeare, because we don't
oh,
know, because we have no idea what the guy was like. I mean, we knew he had a free and open nature, according to Ben Jonson. We knew, but almost no testimony about what his personality was like. And wouldn't it be cool to just know what he was like? That's so. Faulkner, sure. I think he would just tell great stories and drink a lot, and that could be fun. But Shakespeare's the dude I'd want to have dinner
that's
with.
a great choice. That's a really good choice. I'd like to join. I'd like to join in. I can join in at some point, not take over.
Dora, we'd
Leave
love to
you two
have you.
alone.
We'd love to have you. We'll see if we can
Thank
arrange
you.
it.
My agents right away. Thank you so much, Jonathan Franzen, for your time and your generosity. And it's It's a pickup that I'm going to be, I think everyone who's going to listen to this talk should be intrigued by our tiptoeing around this book, this novel that really deserves the amount of time and attention that it demands. Good luck.
Thank you. Dora,
And
thank you so much. And hello, Jerusalem. Sorry I can't be there in person.
bye-bye.
Bye bye.